My name is Jenny, I'm 27 years old, and if you asked me a year ago whether I'd ever set foot inside my aunt's house again, I would have laughed in your face. But there I was, standing on her porch on Thanksgiving, the cold November air biting at my skin as I held my breath and rang the bell. The door swung open, and there she stood, my Aunt Carol, her lips pursed in that familiar disapproving smirk. She gave me one long look, head to toe, and then let out a short laugh. "Oh, you actually showed up? We bet you wouldn't." For a split second, my old instinct kicked in. I wanted to shrink, to apologize for existing like I used to when I was younger. But this time was different. This time I wasn't here to beg for acceptance. I was here for something else entirely. I stepped inside without flinching, brushing past her perfume cloud, and looked straight at the table where every single pair of eyes was glued to me. The entire family had fallen silent. My cousins, who hadn't seen me in years, sat there frozen with half-full plates. My uncle cleared his throat, but no one spoke. I just smiled and said, "Don't worry, I won't stay long." The air grew heavier. The clinking of forks against porcelain had stopped, and it was so quiet I could hear the clock ticking in the living room. I didn't sit down, I just stood there, letting the silence burn. 5 minutes later, just as I expected, my mother shot up from her chair. The sound of her hands slamming against the table rattled the silverware. Her face flushed red, her voice sharp and trembling. "Jenny," she shouted, like my name itself was an accusation. And in that moment, every memory of what she and the rest of them had done to me came rushing back. But what they didn't know, what none of them knew, was that this time, I wasn't the same girl they thought they had broken. This Thanksgiving would be different. When my mom shouted my name, her voice cracked with the same sharp edge I remembered from my teenage years. It wasn't surprise, it was anger. Anger that I dared to come back. I stood there, calm, while she glared at me like I had no right to be in that house. But she wasn't wrong. They had made it clear years ago that I didn't belong. The last time I sat at that same dining table, I was 19. I had just dropped out of college because my mental health was in freefall, and I needed support. Instead of helping me, my family turned it into a spectacle. My mom told everyone how I was a quitter, how I had thrown away my future. Aunt Carol called me lazy. My cousins whispered and laughed behind my back. By the end of the night, I left humiliated, and not one person checked on me after that. Not one. That was the night I swore I'd never give them the satisfaction of watching me crumble again. And for years, I didn't. I built myself up from nothing, I got a job, I worked my way up, I carved out a life without any of them in it. And yet, despite everything, they still had this ugly hold over me. The bitterness stayed like a knot in my chest. So why did I come back tonight? Because revenge tastes better when it's served in front of the people who swore you'd never make it. I wasn't just here to eat turkey and smile politely. I had planned this moment down to the second. I knew they'd sneer, I knew they'd doubt me, and I knew my mom would explode first, she always did. What they didn't know was that this year, I had the upper hand. I took a slow step toward the table, all eyes on me. I could feel their discomfort growing. My mother's jaw clenched as she hissed through her teeth. "You shouldn't have come." I met her stare and smiled. "Oh, I should've. Trust me." Because tonight, I was going to remind every single one of them exactly who they underestimated. I pulled out the empty chair at the far end of the table, the same spot I used to sit in when I was the family's punching bag. The chair scraped loudly against the hardwood floor, making my cousins jump. I sat down slowly, folding my hands in front of me, acting like I belonged there more than anyone else. The silence was unbearable for them, but for me? It was fuel. I wanted them squirming. My cousin Jake, always the loudmouth, finally spoke. "So, what are you even doing here, Jenny? Thought you cut everyone off." His smirk was cocky, the same one he wore when he used to steal my stuff as a kid and then laugh when no one believed me. "I did," I said plainly, keeping my voice steady. And I was happier than I'd ever been. But sometimes, you need to revisit the past, if only to show it you're not afraid anymore. That shut him up quick. Aunt Carol leaned forward, resting her elbows on the table. You don't just walk back in here after all these years and act like nothing happened, she snapped. We thought you were too good for us. I let out a short laugh. Oh, don't flatter yourself. I didn't stay away because I thought I was better. I stayed away because I realized how much worse off I'd be if I kept letting you people tear me apart. That's when my mom slammed her glass down. Wine sloshed over the rim and onto the tablecloth. Enough, she barked. If you came here to stir up drama, then leave. We don't need this. I leaned back in my chair, calm as ever, and looked straight at her. No, Mom. You don't get to shut me down this time. Not tonight. For the first time, she didn't know how to respond. Her eyes flicked around the table, looking for backup, but no one moved. My cousins were frozen, my uncle avoided my gaze, and even Carol seemed thrown off. That's when I knew, I had their attention. And now, it was time to start peeling back the layers of truth they all worked so hard to bury. I let the silence linger, long enough to make them uncomfortable. Then I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the table the way Aunt Carol always did when she wanted to make a point. You know, I began, my voice steady but sharp, it's funny how none of you ever talk about what actually happened. You act like I disappeared because I was some kind of failure. But the truth? I left because of you. The tension at the table spiked instantly. My mom's face twisted in a glare, but I kept talking. Do you remember that Thanksgiving when I was 19? I asked, scanning the faces around me. No one answered. Of course you do. That was the night you all tore me apart in front of each other. My grades, my choices, my future, you dissected me like I wasn't even sitting at the table. And when I cried, you laughed. My cousin Rachel, who used to pile on with the others, shifted in her seat. She wouldn't meet my eyes. And it wasn't just that night, I continued. My hands tightened around the edge of the table, but my voice never wavered. It was years of it. Every time I tried to do something for myself, you cut me down. Every time I reached out, I was ignored or mocked. Do you know what it's like to feel like your own family hates you? My mom snapped, oh, stop being dramatic, Jenny. We were tough on you because we wanted the best for you. I locked eyes with her, my chest tight with the memory of all the nights I'd cried myself to sleep. No. You wanted control. There's a difference. That landed like a stone in water, rippling through the room, no one daring to speak. For once, Aunt Carol wasn't smirking. Jake looked down at his plate. Rachel twisted her napkin in her lap. I could feel the power shifting. For the first time in years, they weren't the ones holding me hostage with their words. I was holding them. And that's when I decided, it wasn't enough to just confront them. I needed to make them face exactly what they had done. I leaned back in my chair, letting the weight of my last words settle over the room. Then, slowly, I looked around the table, at each face, one by one. You know what's funny? I said quietly. Every single one of you thinks you're innocent. Like you were just bystanders. But you weren't. Not one of you. I turned to Jake first. He had always been the cockiest cousin, the one who thought bullying me was harmless fun. Jake, do you remember when you broke into my room when we were kids and stole my journals? You read them out loud in front of everyone at Christmas, and no one stopped you. You humiliated me because you thought it was funny. And when I cried, you called me Psycho Jenny. Do you remember that? Jake's face went pale. He shifted in his chair and muttered, that was years ago. Exactly, I cut him off. And I still remember it like it happened yesterday. Then I turned to Rachel. Her hands were still twisting the napkin in her lap. And you? You used to call me every week when I was in college, not to check on me, but to brag about how much better you were doing. And when I dropped out, you told me I was pathetic. Do you know what that did to me? I already thought I was worthless. And my own cousin, made sure I believed it. Her eyes filled with tears, but I didn't stop. Finally, I turned to Aunt Carol. She was already scowling, ready to defend herself. You always had something to say, didn't you? Every outfit I wore, every choice I made, every little thing about me, you tore it apart. Do you remember what you said to me at Grandma's funeral? Carol looked caught off guard. You leaned over and whispered that Grandma would be ashamed of me, I said, my voice sharp as glass. On the day I buried the only person in this family who ever loved me unconditionally. The room went silent again, but this time, it wasn't the awkward silence of before. It was heavy, suffocating, like the truth itself had sucked all the air out of the house. I looked at my mom last. She stared at me, her jaw clenched, fury in her eyes. And you, I whispered. We'll get to you. The whole table froze. Because they knew that when it came to my mom, the truth was the ugliest of all. My mother's stare burned into me like it always had, but for the first time in my life, I wasn't shrinking under it. I was holding it. Matching it. You've been waiting for this, haven't you? She said bitterly. You came here to play the victim, to blame me for all your mistakes. I shook my head slowly. No, Mom. I didn't come here to blame you. I came here to tell the truth you've spent years trying to bury. Her face twitched, the corner of her lip trembling just enough for me to see the crack in her armor. You want to talk about mistakes? I said, my voice sharper now. How about the way you used to scream at me until I couldn't breathe? How about the nights you locked me in my room so I wouldn't embarrass you in front of the neighbors? Or the time you told me you wished you'd had a different daughter? The words hung in the air like poison. My cousin's eyes widened. Even Aunt Carol, who always backed her sister, looked uneasy. My mom slammed her hand against the table again, her voice shaking. You're exaggerating. You always twist things to make me look bad. No, I said firmly. I remember every word. Every slap. Every time you told me I wasn't good enough. That's not twisting, it's truth. Her face went red, her breathing quickened. She was losing control, and for once, I wasn't. You think this family turned against you? She spat. No, Jenny, you turned against us. You abandoned us. You're ungrateful. I gave you everything, and you threw it away. I leaned forward, locking my eyes on hers. You didn't give me everything. You took everything. My confidence. My peace. My childhood. And when I finally got away, I realized I didn't lose this family. I freed myself from it. The silence after that was different, heavier, deadlier. My mom's mouth opened, but no sound came out. The power she once held over me had crumbled. And for the first time in my life, I saw it, the fear in her eyes. She was afraid of me. I could see her chest heaving, her jaw tight, her hands trembling on the tablecloth. My mother, this woman who had spent her entire life controlling the narrative, controlling me, was cornered. And I wasn't finished. You want to talk about gratitude, Mom? I said, my voice steady, though inside my pulse was hammering. You think I should be grateful for the life you gave me. But let's tell them all what that life actually looked like. Her eyes narrowed, warning me not to continue. That only fueled me more. While you were tearing me apart for not being perfect, you were hiding things from this very table. Things you never wanted anyone here to know. The room grew still. Even Jake stopped fidgeting. I let the silence drag a little before dropping it. Like how many times the landlord showed up at our door because you'd spent the rent money at the casino. Or how you made me lie to Dad about where you went every Thursday night. Or maybe I should tell them about the night you got pulled over, drunk, and had me, your 16-year-old daughter, switch seats so you wouldn't get arrested. Gasps erupted around the table. My cousin's head snapped toward her. Aunt Carol's hand flew to her chest. My uncle muttered, Jesus, Carol, under his breath. My mom's face went white, then red, then white again. Lies, she shouted, her voice cracking. She's making all of this up. Don't listen to her. But I could see it in their eyes, they believed me. They knew me well enough to know I wouldn't come back after all these years to spit out nothing but fiction. I leaned in closer, lowering my voice but making sure every word landed. You can call me a failure, a quitter, a disappointment, all you want. But at least I'm not a hypocrite. At least I didn't build my entire reputation on a lie. The silence was brutal. My mom looked around for someone, anyone, to defend her, but no one spoke. That's when I knew I had cracked her mask wide open. And for the first time, the rest of the family was finally seeing her the way I always had. My mother's face was flushed so deeply red it almost looked purple, but what stood out most was the silence that followed. For the first time in my life, no one rushed to her defense. Aunt Carol shifted uncomfortably in her chair. My uncle cleared his throat but kept his eyes glued to his plate. My cousins exchanged uneasy glances, their forks and knives abandoned on their plates. It was as if a veil had been lifted. You see, I said, sitting back with a calmness I didn't even recognize in myself. For years, I was the scapegoat. Every failure, every problem, dumped on me, so she wouldn't have to face her own mess. And you all went along with it. You let her turn me into the family's black sheep while pretending everything was fine. Rachel finally broke the silence. Is that true? She asked, her voice quiet but pointed, her eyes fixed on my mom. Of course not, my mom snapped, her voice higher than usual, strained. She's twisting everything, trying to make me look bad. But the panic in her tone betrayed her. Jake leaned back in his chair, his face pale. I mean, some of that sounds like stuff I remember, he muttered, not looking up. Aunt Carol pressed her lips together, her smirk gone. For once, she had nothing to say. And I seized the moment. All these years, I thought maybe I was crazy. Maybe I was too sensitive, maybe I deserved the way I was treated. But standing here, watching all of you, I realized something. None of you ever really looked at me. You just looked at the version of me she created. The broken, worthless kid she painted me to be. I leaned forward, my voice steady. But look at me now. I built my own life. I don't need her approval. I don't need any of yours. And the truth? I'm not here for acceptance. I'm here so you never forget what you did. So every time you sit at this table, you'll remember this moment, the night you saw her mask fall. The weight of my words hung heavy in the air. No one dared to speak. My mother sat rigid, her hands gripping the edge of the table, her eyes glassy but furious. For once, she wasn't in control. I was. And I wasn't done yet. I let the silence work in my favor, soaking in the sight of their faces, shocked, guilty, uncomfortable. My mother was trembling with rage, but she had nothing left to throw at me. And that was when I decided to twist the knife. You know what the best part is? I said, leaning back in my chair with a small smile. All that energy you spent tearing me down, betting on me to fail, it didn't work. A ripple of unease passed through the room. My cousins exchanged nervous looks. I've got a career I love, I continued, my tone calm but deliberate. I've been promoted twice in the last 2 years. I own my own apartment, bought with money I earned, not begged, not gambled, not stolen. And I'm engaged to someone who actually loves me for who I am. Rachel's head snapped up, surprise flickering in her eyes. Jake shifted, clearly not expecting this turn. Aunt Carol raised her brows but stayed quiet. I let the words sink in before adding, meanwhile, you all sat here year after year, laughing about how I wouldn't amount to anything. Tell me, how does it feel knowing the one you all dismissed is doing better than half of you combined? The sting was intentional. I wanted them to feel it. Jake muttered under his breath, she's bluffing. I smirked. Am I? I reached into my bag and pulled out a small velvet box. I opened it just enough for the diamond ring to catch the light. My cousins gasped softly. Aunt Carol's eyes widened. I didn't come back here because I needed closure, I said, snapping the box shut. I came back here to show you what you lost. You could have been part of my life, part of my success, part of my future. But you chose cruelty. You chose to break me. And you failed. I turned my gaze directly on my mother. You failed. Her lips quivered, but no words came out. The silence that followed was thick, almost unbearable for them. But for me, it was sweet. For the first time in my life, I was the one holding all the cards. And I had no intention of leaving without delivering the final blow. I stood slowly, the legs of my chair scraping against the floor. All eyes followed me, but no one dared to speak. The silence was thick, almost suffocating for them, but I breathed it in like fresh air. I smoothed down my coat, slid the ring box back into my bag, and looked around the table one last time. You know, I said quietly, there was a time when I would have done anything to earn a place here. I would have twisted myself into knots, begged for scraps of approval, just to feel like I mattered to this family. I let my eyes settle on each of them in turn, Jake, Rachel, Aunt Carol, my uncle, before finally locking onto my mother. Her face was pale, her jaw clenched, her eyes watery but burning. But now? I continued, my voice gaining strength. Now I realize I don't need this table. I don't need your approval. I never did. Because the truth is, family isn't blood, it's the people who actually care about you. And none of you fit that description. A hush fell over the room so deep that even the ticking clock in the corner felt louder. I reached for my coat, draped it over my arm, and walked toward the door. With each step, I felt lighter, stronger. The house that once felt like a prison suddenly felt small, too small for me. Just as I reached for the doorknob, my mom's voice broke the silence. It wasn't sharp or commanding this time. It was desperate. Jenny, wait. I paused, my hand hovering over the knob, but I didn't turn around. You don't get it, she said, her voice cracking. You were supposed to need me. You were supposed to stay small. Her words sent a chill down my spine, but I didn't let them pierce me. Instead, I turned just enough to meet her eyes. That's the difference between us, I said softly. You need control. I just need freedom. And tonight, I finally have it. With that, I pulled the door open. The cold night air hit my face, sharp and refreshing. And as I stepped outside, leaving them all frozen in silence behind me, I knew my revenge was complete. But this wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. The cold November air wrapped around me like a cloak as I stepped onto the porch. The laughter, the clinking of silverware, the chatter that usually spilled from that house every Thanksgiving, it was all gone. Inside, there was only silence. For the first time in my life, they were the ones left speechless. And me? I felt free. I walked down the steps slowly, each one feeling lighter than the last. My breath clouded in the night air, and I realized my hands weren't shaking anymore. For years, every thought of them had made me tremble, anger, fear, humiliation, shame. Tonight, I'd walked into the lion's den and walked out untouched. No, not untouched, victorious. I unlocked my car and slid into the driver's seat. The leather was cold, but my chest was warm, buzzing with adrenaline. I sat there for a moment, gripping the steering wheel, letting it all sink in. This was the first Thanksgiving in almost a decade that I wasn't leaving that house in pieces. Instead, I was leaving with my head high, my voice still echoing in their ears. I could still see my mother's face when I told her she failed. That look, the mix of rage, fear, and helplessness, was seared into my memory. She had spent her whole life convincing herself she held all the power, and in a single night, I stripped it away. But as satisfying as it was, the truth was bigger than revenge. Tonight wasn't just about making them listen. It was about proving to myself that I wasn't the broken, powerless girl they once convinced me I was. I was stronger than them, stronger than their words, stronger than the years of damage they inflicted. I took a deep breath, my chest rising and falling slowly. For the first time in years, I felt something I thought I'd lost forever, peace. And I knew one thing with absolute certainty: I would never, ever let them have power over me again. The days after Thanksgiving were strange. I expected silence, maybe a cold wall of avoidance from my family. That's how they'd always handled conflict: pretend it didn't happen, shove it under the rug, move on like nothing was wrong. But that wasn't what happened this time. On Friday morning, my phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number. I almost ignored it, but curiosity won. When I answered, it was Rachel. Her voice was shaky. "Jenny. I just wanted to say I'm sorry. For everything I said to you back then. I was cruel. I thought I was being funny, or maybe I just wanted to feel better about myself. But hearing you last night, I realized how much I hurt you. I didn't say anything at first. I wasn't sure what to say. Apologies from my family weren't something I'd ever experienced. Finally, I managed, thank you. It doesn't erase what happened, but I appreciate you saying that." She sniffled and said she wanted to meet up sometime, just the two of us, away from everyone else. I didn't agree right away, but I told her I'd think about it. Then, later that night, I got a text from Jake of all people. Just 4 words: "You were right. Sorry." It wasn't much, but coming from him, it was more than I ever expected. Even Aunt Carol, who had always been the queen of backhanded comments, sent me a message on Sunday. It wasn't an apology exactly, but she admitted, maybe we were too hard on you. Maybe we didn't see things clearly. For her, that was monumental. But there was one person I didn't hear from at all. My mother. And deep down, I knew I probably never would. Still, for the first time, I didn't care. I didn't need her apology. I didn't need her validation. Because this time, I left that house on my terms. And that was enough. By the time Monday rolled around, I couldn't stop replaying everything in my head: the silence at the table, the way my mother's mask cracked, the sudden shift in how my family looked at me. But more than that, I kept thinking about the messages I'd gotten afterward. Rachel wanted to meet. Jake admitted, in his own clumsy way, that I was right. Even Aunt Carol, who I never thought would budge, softened her tone. For years, I had dreamed about moments like this, where they would finally recognize what they'd done, where they would finally apologize. But now that it was actually happening, I didn't know how to feel. Part of me wanted to slam the door shut. To keep them exactly where I had left them, behind me. They hadn't been there for me when I needed them most. Why should I let them be there now, when I was finally standing on my own? But another part of me wondered. Not about forgiveness, exactly. I wasn't sure I believed in that. But maybe about something different. Maybe about taking the power back in a new way, not just by confronting them, but by deciding on my terms if they had a place in my life. I sat on my couch, scrolling through Rachel's text again. She wanted to meet at a coffee shop. Just the two of us. I could feel the hesitation in her words, like she wasn't sure I'd even respond. I set my phone down and stared at the ceiling. Did I owe her anything? Did I owe Jake, or Aunt Carol? No. I didn't owe them forgiveness. I didn't owe them reconciliation. But maybe, just maybe, I owed it to myself to decide, not out of fear or pain, but from a place of strength. Because for the first time in my life, I had the choice. And I wasn't going to rush it. I stared at Rachel's message for 2 more days before I finally made a decision. Every time I picked up my phone, I felt the weight of it pressing on me. Part of me wanted to delete the text, erase her number, and move on with my life. After all, she had been one of the worst offenders, smiling to my face while twisting the knife deeper. But the other part of me kept remembering her voice on the phone, shaky and soft, so different from the smug cousin who used to mock me for not keeping up. For the first time, she'd sounded human. On Wednesday, I typed back, "Okay. Coffee. Saturday at 11. 1 hour." I hit send before I could talk myself out of it. When Saturday came, I almost didn't go. I sat in my car outside the cafe, my hands gripping the steering wheel, debating whether to just drive away. But then I remembered something important. I wasn't doing this for her. I was doing it for me. To prove that I could face her, face any of them, without shrinking. So I went in. Rachel was already there, sitting nervously at a corner table. She looked smaller somehow, not in size but in presence. She stood when she saw me, like she wasn't sure if I'd actually show up. "Jenny," she said, her voice low. "Thanks for coming." I nodded and sat down. 1 hour, I reminded her. She smiled faintly, almost sadly. Fair enough. The conversation started awkwardly. She fumbled with her coffee cup, tripping over her words, apologizing again for the things she'd said when we were younger. For the first time, she didn't sound defensive or dismissive. She sounded like someone who had thought about her actions, and hated herself for them. And while I didn't forgive her, I listened. Really listened. Because maybe this wasn't about letting her back into my life. Maybe it was about finally letting go of the grip her words had held over me for so long. Sitting across from Rachel in that quiet cafe, I realized something that surprised me. I wasn't angry anymore. Not at her, not in that moment. The rage that used to live in my chest, the one that kept me up at night replaying every cruel word, was gone. It didn't mean I forgave her. Forgiveness was too big, too heavy to hand over so easily. But what I felt instead was control. For the first time, I wasn't reacting to her. I wasn't shrinking, or defending, or trying to prove myself. I was choosing how much space she got in my life. And that choice belonged to me. After an hour, I stood. "Rachel," I said, looking her straight in the eye, "I appreciate your apology. Really, I do. But I'm not sure I'm ready to let you back in, not yet. Maybe not ever. I need time. And if you're serious about making things right, that's on you to prove, not me to chase." She nodded, her eyes wet, and whispered, "I understand." And for once, I believed her. When I left the cafe, I didn't feel weighed down. I felt lighter. Stronger. Over the next few weeks, other family members trickled into my messages. Some offered apologies, some just reached out with silence behind their words, testing if I'd respond. But I didn't rush. I didn't bend. I answered when I wanted to, ignored when I didn't. As for my mother, she never called. Never texted. Never reached out. And that silence said more than words ever could. But the truth was, I didn't need her to. Because I had finally learned something that night at Thanksgiving: revenge isn't always about destroying the other person. Sometimes, it's about standing so firmly in your own power that they can't touch you anymore. And that's exactly what I did. For the first time in my life, I walked away not as the broken girl they had tried to make me, but as the woman they never saw coming. And that was the sweetest ending of all.